I absolutely do, guys. I mean, I instantaneously get questions, so I do you.
All right, we'll defer to Joe. Seeing it's 1:30, entertain a motion to return from recess.
So moved.
Motion second to return from recess. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Welcome.
Your next item is a presentation from IEM, scheduled for 1:30. And so I'll have them introduce themselves and they'll get started into their presentation unless anybody has any questions about procedure or anything like that. If you guys are good to go, then we can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. We're on their timeline, so let's get them.
Sounds
If we
good.
have any questions for you afterwards, we'll do that.
Come.
How are you?
Doing well. Thank y'all for having us.
Absolutely.
So, my name is James Clark. I am IEM's Director of Response and Recovery. To give you a little bit of sense of my background and where I've come from, I started working with federal grants after Hurricane Katrina. I'm from Louisiana and progressed in the recovery with the state of Louisiana. Became the Deputy Director for Recovery. Handled all of the Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, all those different funding sources. We did about $100 million a month over 7 years, which requires a lot of process, internal control, and reconciliation of those funds. The last few years I spent with Louisiana, I was the finance director of the agency for all federal funds, which included EMPG grants, Homeland Security, SHIP, long variety of federal grants that we employed to run the agency. I have since spent 7 years now doing consulting. I spent 6 years with Deloitte & Touche, helping local and state governments implementing federal grants. I've always had a bit of a niche in managing cash flow and the compliance around managing federal dollars because it's just where I spent the most time in my background. I also have Heather Hilliard with us, who's spent a lot of time working on ARPA grants since she's joined IEM, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you. I'm Heather Hilliard. I have recently left government work. I was state, parish there, and local government, and that was at Easter. So since before Katrina, I have been doing public assistance. I was on the other end, so James was telling me yes or no on the funding, but I have done public assistance, hazard mitigation, other special types of funding, and have done every disaster response except volcano. And that almost happened on vacation, and I did not take that opportunity. So I have come to IEM, and I'm working on ARPA. And the things that we're looking at are not only the ARPA funds, but as of yesterday, since the president signed into the Infrastructure Act, former Lieutenant Governor Mitch Landrieu, my former mayor, Mitch Landrieu, because I live in New Orleans, is actually administrator of those funds. So we're actually incorporating that overview into our ARPA as well. As you'll see us, we'll talk about that with expenditure mapping here shortly. So we'll get into that, and we'll give you a little bit about what we're offering to you. I want to present the company to you. We are the largest woman and minority-owned firm for crisis management in the United States. That's one of the reasons why I chose to come to this organization. We were founded locally in Louisiana, and our headquarters is in North Carolina, but we have locations all over the United States and do work for clients all over. Some of the large numbers: $270 billion in federal grants, 3.7 million eligibilities performed on a variety of projects. A lot of this you'll see is also COVID-oriented, where we've done over 1.5 million vaccinations and things like that. And we have over 700 direct employees. And that's one of the things that differentiates us, is that we do not look for employees to say, hey, I got an ARPA contract, come on for short term, and then you're left out. So we bring on employees that we work on projects through the duration and get moved to the next project. So we're not looking at short-term employees, which gives us a sense of community and really reliance that our training is good and we can bring it forward in the best practices that we've used. And I think that's a great differentiator. So when you hire IEM, you hire our employees, not a subcontractor that's going to come in that we farmed out to bring them here. This is an example of some of our COVID-19 work that we've done recently. What's not on here is our interactions with Bloomberg Philanthropies. We are one of the few elite partners that does expert answering. So from the day practically that it was signed into law, we have been answering questions for communities, municipalities, even some large county cities that are also part of that, and doing guidance before the Treasury even started submitting FAQs. So we've been part of that process, submitting questions back to the Treasury, getting answers on those things, and really aligning what is possible, what you should really submit to Treasury, because that does not sound at this point with the interim final rule to be eligible, and moving forward. So those cities are all over the United States, and you just see a big blue map if we were presenting that to you. So that is something that's not on there, but has really strengthened our team's understanding as we work with communities in their disparate information, what access do they have to for data, and really helping them where they're needing the help most. So some of our differentiators, I mentioned our experience. Those of us here, we have had boots on the ground, been at the local, on the county level, or the state level to do these kinds of projects. Like I said, 6 months ago, I was still doing these projects with the local mindset. So when I come in, I'm still thinking quite frequently as a government person, like what's going to matter? How am I going to get this outreach to my stakeholders? How am I going to be transparent? How are we going to implement these strategies and really relate to you on that level? We do have the integrated team, as I mentioned, that we're all direct hires. We're not sending you any subcontractors like others might. We have a collaborative approach. We're here to guide, recommend, be your dictionary, be your encyclopedia, being, whatever you need, and pulling together for this program and making it a success here in Oklahoma County. And then we have a very flexible approach. So at the end, we'll actually show you something that was in our bid about our work plan. And that was just, here's some ideas, but something that we can work on. And we work with whatever your timeframes are. I'm actually submitted as your project manager. So I'm meeting you here for the first time today. If you have questions directly of me too, I'll be the one that you'll be seeing as we move forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to James.
Thank you. So a couple of areas that have been a focus of ours as we've worked with other clients, expenditure mapping, and this really comes from my background in handling the financial side of these grant programs. It's impossible for you to know and be responsible in how you manage these federal dollars until you know exactly how much money you've got to spend. And so while we may be working on American Rescue Plan, whether it's asked of us or it's a responsibility of the county, you've got to go through a process to understand, have you covered all of your other COVID-related expenses? There's rules and there's timelines associated with the different funding sources. And I'll get into it in a little bit more detail in a minute. But that's something that we can help you all with either performing or just providing structure in how to perform. Compliance and monitoring, again, we're going to talk about this more in a few minutes. This is the area that I would say our clients worry about the most, but it shouldn't necessarily be. We've had a high success rate in working through building internal controls into your process so that you don't have to worry about that compliance when you get to the end. There is a certain amount of pain that everyone has to feel in documenting an administrative burden when you're dealing with federal grants. And if you build it into the process up front, you can save yourself a lot more heartburn at the end. So that is something that we push very hard. You don't always recognize the importance of those processes until you get to the audit stage, which happens later. Reporting and closeout. We're going to talk more about the importance of your reporting and public transparency, particularly with these funds. It will be the public transparency, in my opinion, will be very important. You're going to want to tell your story or someone's going to tell it for you. But as we work through our process, we are preparing audit-ready grant files for closeout, and we want to leave you in a position to where if an auditor comes in 2-3 years down the road, all of us are gone, everyone from your staff is gone, those auditors can find what they need and easily go through and show that you've documented those grants. So, expenditure mapping. You've got these different funding sources. They have different timelines associated with them. COVID-19 public assistance reimbursement, the CARES Act, which has a specific timeline for when the expenditures could occur. Now you've got ARPA, and then the newest will be the infrastructure grant program. So in order to evaluate how much money you've got, I like to start with your expenditure report, see everything that's been tagged to this event, catalog it by what funding source is going to cover that cost. In this case, you don't have to worry about cost share with PA because it's 100% funding. And then you can figure out how much ARPA funding you have left over to apply towards other initiatives. So generally, you're going to want to use your PA funds first. If it's eligible at cost. Then you're going to go to your CARES Act funds. If it meets that description and it's within that time period, you would use those funds next. And then even within ARPA, there are a lot of different eligible items. The broadest is your revenue loss funding. So if you have revenue loss that you can demonstrate at the full value of your ARPA funds, you have a significant amount of latitude in how you want to use those funds. So it's just about being strategic and applying the federal dollars to the expenses that make the most sense for you. The other benefit of going through this process is at the end, you have a map where you can demonstrate to anyone that there is no duplication of benefit. If you work each program independently and an auditor comes in and says, how do I know that you didn't submit this to CARES Act, or how do I know you didn't submit this to FEMA? You don't have an easy way to demonstrate that. But if you walk through this process, you can show them, here's all my expenses, everything that's been tagged to this response, and I can demonstrate exactly which funding source we submitted it to and reconcile the revenue back. So compliance and reporting. This is intentionally a little complicated, but it doesn't really have to be. It's really showing you the overlay of 3 different areas. So your objectives is that you want good project progress reporting, you want to demonstrate compliance, and you want to meet your reporting requirements to the feds. Your stakeholders or your organizational structure, you've got the county, you've got the individual program or program staff, individual projects that you're going to run, and then you may have contractors, so you may have sub-recipients. Maybe you're giving money to private nonprofits and they're hiring contractors. So those are the different levels at which you may have to do monitoring. And then your internal controls, those are just the tools in your toolbox that you would use across each of those levels. So performing a risk assessment for your sub-recipients, determining what the control environment and what the control activities are when you do your program design. All that is intended to build a compliant process so that you can easily document what you've done and the decisions you've made when somebody comes in to perform audit later on. So I'm going to hand it off to Heather again. I want for Heather to talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned and how we have helped our clients to determine the best use of funds. There's so many ideas out there on how the money can be spent, and refining that down is what Heather's going to talk about.
Thank you. So one of the things that I have not only learned from living in New Orleans with a lot of communities negatively impacted even before COVID is that our sensitivities for rebuilding really need to include them in our mitigation process, in our expenditure process. Historically, they've been disadvantaged, just the way the system's been set. So one of the things that I've taken with one of our other clients is using some of my own background was looking at disadvantaged communities. There's a lot of public data out there from the CDC, and the buzzword now is Social Vulnerability Index. There's the Community Resilience Index. There are other things with the census tract on race and ethnicity and languages spoken. All of those come together to give you kind of an idea of the level of need of a community. So what we have started to do is we have a multifaceted process, and it's a mechanism, it's a tool we've built based for your community that says, okay, here are these public data sets. Looking at them all together, it's just a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper, usually an Excel spreadsheet. But then we take and we say, okay, here's what the county's priorities are. Here's what they're looking to do. It could be COVID-19, it could be housing, it could be other infrastructure kind of components that now overlap ARPA and infrastructure. And we take those and saying, here's the existing grant dollars or the reimbursement, and what is the sphere which goes into that mapping and implementation? What is literally the outreach going to be? How many people does it touch if we pick this program that aligns with this strategic priority of the commissioners, and we look at these vulnerability indices? What is that going to do? Because you can't always necessarily compare a $5 million project to another $5 million project, because it looks at totally different obstacles to a person in the community. So this way we have a tool that is not a decision maker. It is not like saying, okay, I'm deep grade, and on a scale of 1 to 100, if you don't get above a 51, you're going to fail. That's not what this is. This is to give you an impact presentation, a number, a numeric that actually shows, okay, if you have $5 million and you're helping people with the food bank, which after Katrina, I have extensive work with the food banks, and you have $5 million, and it's going to look at affordable childcare, not only for the 200% of the federal poverty guideline and below, but also our essential workers who aren't taking as many shifts because they don't have somebody to cover overnight. Pulling those together and showing you the benefit for your specific community and how you can leverage that and say, okay, well, I can actually say, you asked for $5 million, I can give you 4. This project, if I gave them 6, would make better sense in our community. So it is an influencing tool for you to make the decisions of what you want to fund. It is not necessarily I'm the teacher and saying, okay, these are not worthy projects. That's not what this does at all. It gives you impact based on the strategies that you've decided, that you've created, that you've heard from stakeholders, be them internal agencies or external constituents that you hear. So this is something that we've developed, and we will work with you to make your own priorities and your own agency priorities in here. And it's something that's been really unique, and it's been missing, and we've been talking about for a long time with FEMA grants, is they just look at dollars. This is not a FEMA BCA for hazard mitigation project. This is not going to say, if I put X number of dollars in, do I get a ratio greater than 1? Okay, then you're funded. That's not what this does at all. You're like, I know, I hate the BCA tool, but don't tell them I said that. So this is actually a different kind of tool where we look very specifically at your needs, and you get to set the priorities. And if you want something to be weighted heavier, okay, we can do that in the tool because we've created it. All right. This then feeds in, if you have your score, your different ratings, and you could do it as a color code for gold star, bronze star, that sort of thing. That feeds into this grant logic model. So you see what is the benefit to my own community, and then you look at the projects that come in. So you have inputs like, we might want to pay for the hazard pay for staffing that didn't get it. We might want to put in other funding for some programs that were cut because of our revenue loss. Then you move forward to the activities. We're processing the applications. We're processing these work projects that our agencies and our stakeholders in the community have said. Moving forward, outputs, what are we going to get out of it? So we know how many lives would be touched with that socioeconomic benefit tool, but now you're looking at the dollars. Are you going to put it out of infrastructure money? Are you putting it out of your revenue replacement pot, which is your most flexible? How are you going to be using this? What we're finding with some of our communities is actually they paid for something out of CARES. It should go back to COVID-19 PA, so they actually get more flexible funding back. That's part of this process too. So there is some of, as you saw in the earlier slide, James discussed, little projects moving around because it's better suited to use your most inflexible money first. So you get this money freed up in your outputs. You're looking at your outcomes. Some of your departments really just, your social service departments typically just, I need the money back so I can get the staff to do the social working, to do that outreach, to do the placement for foster care, those sorts of things. Other departments may say, I just need a software upgrade because then I don't need as many staff. Because you're not looking to expand your budget. You're looking to serve the needs and be a catalyst and a force multiplier so that your budget is back on normal in the years ahead, because you're not looking just to, I want to spend money now to have a higher budget in 3 years. That's not what we're looking to do or help you do. And then you have the impacts, because that's what we're trying to measure, and that's what comes in with the socio-economic benefit tool, is that we're looking, what does this mean to each person in the community? How has their life been touched? It's not only about looking at the disadvantaged, vulnerable population, it's looking at your whole community and the area around you. Right? And through these processes, really, you do want to tell your own story. You want to be transparent to the public. How have you used this? It wasn't just somebody frequently having just left government in Louisiana, a pet project, that's how it got funded. That's not what the story is on this funding at all. So by using these tools, we help you create your own story. We can create a framework. You can post it online. You can do monthly reports. As often as we interact with you, as often as you want that interaction with the community, we can help you do that. So this is just one report of a status update report we could do, but it all feeds into the treasurer's reporting guidance. So when we're looking at that grant logic model, when we're talking about the socioeconomic model, we are considering the 69 or 70 different aspects that you have to check the box to fill in the report, to send the report to Treasury, because you don't want all your projects to be other. You want them to be in the specific lines where they could best fit. And by doing this other earlier work, it really fits into that model. This from the bid is just an example of the work plan. It's a Gantt chart that shows the different variables that we presented, that here are some deliverables we've worked with other areas. So these are all negotiable. If you want to have more stakeholder interaction, if you want to have more presentation and communications with the community as your staff are moving these forward, totally possible. If you want us to help do the leveraging of the projects, we can make that more robust in this process too. This just gives you an idea of the volume of staff we have to help you. Means that you are parallel processing everything with unique individuals that are IEM employees assigned to you to do this work. And however you want to have these workflows with deliverables, if you have timeframes in your own minds for whatever's going on in the county that you need to have certain projects completed quicker, we can change this workflow absolutely on that. And with that, James and I are open to questions. I know that there were questions around the expenditure mapping, and we can go back to that, or the socioeconomic model. We can go back to that too, whatever questions you might have. And as they will come through our virtual presenter too, or virtual list.
What kind of financial reporting system do you guys use? And the reason I ask is, and I didn't ask earlier, the compatibility with our system. If we're tracking expenditures and so on and so forth, what are you going to need from us, or will yours load into ours, or are we running two separate tracks, or how's it going to work? Does that make sense?
So it makes sense. First off, your accounting system is the system of record. I don't want to have your financial data anywhere else.
Okay.
Then we end up having to reconcile the two of them, and it can get a little bit messy.
Yeah.
So I would want for your system of record to be the source of the data that we use.
Right.
Now, there will probably be an ancillary grant management tool that we could use, but it really depends on your need. If you are using revenue loss dollars to supplement the budget of your housing agency, then it's probably really simple. We don't need a robust grant management tool. If you are doing a public outreach campaign where you are helping to fund, Wi-Fi bills for disadvantaged communities so that their kids can do remote learning, then there's an intake process, applications, and all of that stuff will need to be tracked. But that would be a system that would be independent and feed into your accounting system. So what we would do, what I would want to work with your finance department on, is figuring out exactly how you are using your current financial system. Your object codes, your program codes, etc. Maybe you've got reporting categories that you use to separate your different grant funds, so that we could utilize your system and then recognize the revenue back when it's drawn down. What's important is at whatever level we break down an individual grant, we want expenditures on that code, and we want revenue on that code, and we want for it to net zero at the end. And then our grant management tool will be where the document retention is stored for all the supporting documentation, so that an auditor can come in and see expense, revenue, reconciled, supporting documents for every expense, and then their job's pretty much done. Sorry, I hope I didn't overcomplicate your response, but.
Well, our system is quite complicated. Tyler Munis, you have experience with Tyler Munis?
That's what I just left.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No.
No,
Yeah.
I have total empathy.
Stick around and tell me all about it.
So in regard to reporting, though, we would take that financial data. Most of the time, we drop that into Excel, and then we can visualize that with Power BI or a Tableau, a number of different tools, so that you can get the executive level reports that you want. But like I said, I don't want your financial data in our system.
And I would ask the question, are you on the cloud? Did you do the migration to the cloud 2 years ago? You know?
I don't think so. Cody, did we do that? I don't think we did. I didn't know that was.
I did that about a year and a half ago. I've got a yes and a no. It's just a food for thought. I don't really know, need a definitive answer. Either way you do it, we can pull it out so that we can do that integration because, actually as a PAHM, all of that happiness, that's how we were reconciling it, and we found that a prior administration did not do the tracking that James just mentioned, so we had to actually clean all that up, especially for the PA because it's an expense and a reimbursement process. So that is totally possible with Munis in the way that you can do the subcodes and everything works.
One of the other, you said something interesting, the infrastructure grants and stuff like that.
Mhm.
That's completely separate from ARPA. Is that, and if I get out of our scope or something, I don't even see one of the attorneys here, but is that something that you guys would submit grants if there are projects that are submitted that can't necessarily be funded by ARPA funds, or how?
Well, so you've got a number of different federal sources. Depending on what outcomes you're trying to accomplish, there may be overlap in ways that you can use those dollars to support the same overall outcome or priority. So what we want to do is take that big picture into account and how you are accomplishing all of your goals. And the infrastructure funding could be a component of that. Depends on where you want to spend your ARPA money, right? You may have some infrastructure things that you want to do that ARPA funding allows for, and may decide, you know what, this new infrastructure money can do that. And with the ARPA funding, I instead want to go and do, and actually, if I could, I'd love to jump back and just explain this in a slightly different way. The socio-economic impact, this is going to be a way for you to get an indicator of how it's going to affect the community. This is going to be an indicator of how feasible it is to implement. When you go through this thought process to figure out how much information do I have to collect, what do I have to do with it in order to accomplish my goal, it may clearly say, okay, well, I'm going to have to spend 4 times as much money to accomplish less. So these are just indicators so that when you're selecting how to implement programs and accomplish your goals. So anyway.
If I can give you 2 examples from 2 other communities, because obviously I've been working with them before we kept saying, and then Infrastructure Act will drop, and they need to figure out what's happening. So one of my communities was looking to do something for their public safety group, and they were actually, it was not sure that it was really directly impacting the vulnerable communities as a result of COVID-19. But what they did say is that they needed more space for the 911 center for the emergency management staff, and they wanted to build some of that out and give them more space. They can do that with the ARPA money, particularly in the revenue loss category. However, with the Infrastructure Act, water is covered under both, broadband is covered under both, sewer is covered under both. My ARPA money is more programmatically flexible. The goal is to move basically the bricks and mortar, gray infrastructure to the Infrastructure Act, keep the programmatic components or some of the other building pieces that aren't in the Infrastructure Act for them. So they're looking to do some transportation enhancements. That is now moving out of ARPA into infrastructure because we've been talking about this project. The other one where we were just talking about it yesterday is a housing project. They need affordable housing. They actually have a location owned by the government that is not really used right now, and they're looking to do a rebuild of it so that it is now turned into affordable housing instead of empty office space that they're not going to ever be using again. We also already started that process. Your water is going to be insufficient if it's going to be housing instead of a daily office routine. Your sewage pipes are going to be insufficient. Let's get the broadband in there as well as part of your statewide broadband act. So we are marrying the two so that when I see a project, we have that expertise in both areas where I can say, let's talk about your wicked problems. Let's talk about root cause analysis. Why is this a strategy priority? Got it. I will help you match to the right funding source and say, let's look at infrastructure. Or this could go back to CARES because you spent this money and I can open this up instead of using the most flexible ARPA funds. So we are looking at that and we're able to do that with you to give you recommendations on better use of all this federal funding.
So as we issue funds, what kind of monitoring? Are you doing on-site monitoring? Are you?
So I could take that one.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about compliance, and I probably may have shorthanded the monitoring a little bit. Subrecipient monitoring, it depends on who that money's going through to. If it's going directly from you to a contractor, then you've got to make sure you've got proper procurement documentation that you check to make sure that they're not on, what's the acronym for the debarred list?
Yeah.
Anyway, the suspended and debarred contractors list the federal government has. If you're passing it through to a local or a private nonprofit and they're going and spending that money, then they're a subrecipient that you now have to monitor. So, what we would do, we would take 100% of your subrecipients. We would review their single audit. If you receive over $750,000 in federal funds in a year from all sources, you are required to perform a single audit. It goes to the federal clearinghouse. We can pull it down off the internet and we can review it to see what money are they getting and are they following the rules. Then we would take your high risk subrecipients and we would perform, go through a sample and perform site visits. So that process, it is, are they doing what they said they would do with the money? But it's also, are they following all the 2 CFR 200 requirements, such as a dedicated account for federal funds, remitting any interest earned, having segregation of duties between their employees, and do they have the internal controls built in so that they are capable to responsibly manage the federal dollar?
It's very much like debris monitoring after a tornado. You actually have somebody in the truck physically behind the reflector watching what they're doing. That works both ways for us. We can have somebody on site that's doing that work with you, or we can do it remotely and have periodic site visits. But to me, just where I live, it's very much like a debris monitor that somebody is watching all the processes. You can put in stop gaps to say, here's a gatekeeper's spot where we need to look, or if you have internal staff that we train them and we work with them so that your internal staff can do it too. We can do a blend of that.
Generally, when it comes to monitoring, you would do that for all of your subrecipients for all federal sources. You could separate and do ARPA specifically if you wanted, but if you already have a process, maybe we would, help to take that process and just include the ARPA checklist into that monitoring. Because when you do a site visit, you're going to look at, FEMA or HUD or Treasury, all of those funding sources when you're doing that review.
I will also add, while you're thinking of other questions, we are giving you a PDF of this presentation so you can go back and look at what I noticed you guys were looking at. You can look at it in more detail, or in paper if you just print it out. What you'll be getting.
Perfect. Do you have an Oklahoma office?
Do not.
Go back and see. We have 12 regional offices.
Where's your closest regional office?
I can drive here in a day. I looked at that. I don't think that's the closest office, but I looked.
Okay.
I like to drive, but still, yeah, I can get here. I think you're a 10-hour drive from here, something like that.
Dallas is our closest
Is your
physical location.
And in terms of, I think in your proposal you said you'd be here as needed, but kind of give me an idea of what in your mind that would look like.
So I can tell you, the world has changed a bit since COVID has happened. We have some clients where our entire team is there for the duration and everything is done face to face. And we have others where it's kind of a mix of remote work and in-person work. So it is really up to you. We can establish a local office without any problem. We do that. We just set one up in Illinois this week, matter of fact. But it's really, we're going to take our cues from you. If I were to tell you what I think would be most effective, I would have the leadership team here pretty consistently during the early months when presumably you're going through project selection and vetting and program design. And then once you get into kind of the reimbursement and closeout process, a lot more of that's going to be your supporting documentation and grant file work, which we could facilitate remotely. And then we would still come probably bi-weekly or monthly for monthly reports and face-to-face time.
And your standing meetings, whatever your commissioner meetings are, or your subcommittee meetings, any finance work group meetings, that sort of thing, that's what I'm doing with another client, physically there and remote work. One of our clients, I was there every day for several weeks, and I just lived there and went through this early part of the process. So it's flexible. So if we be in the team and whomever, if we're selected, the people that I have that will be coming to you, we could do that local office. So they're physically here doing the monitoring or pairing up with procurement as the bids are coming through and doing risk analysis for the subcontractors, those sorts of things, working with the finance team with the Munis system. You saw, I had to delete, but yes, the Munis system we.
I'm good. I don't have anything further.
No, I'm okay.
All right, if no further questions, we'll let a few minutes to do any kind of closing.
Okay. I guess I would just close with, it would be helpful, what we would like to do, if selected, is come and have a kickoff meeting to walk through what your program goals and objectives are. We've worked with some clients who just want for us to do grant management and compliance. We've worked with others who just want for us to do public outreach and vet out what concepts they would implement with the grant funding. So, the socioeconomic analysis of figuring out, how you're going to, or how much effect or impact on the community you'll have with each idea. There could be a series of public outreach meetings to collect all the concepts, vet them all, post it all publicly, go walk them through that process so that it's very obvious that you've gone through a very deliberate process to choose where you would spend these dollars. And it was not a decision of what was your pet project. It was what made the most sense and was the most feasible that would have the most impact on the community. So it really is up to you all to let us know what scope you want for us to spend our time and energy on. We could do all of that from start to finish, or we could just be your auditors in the background, making sure that no money is called back. So I assume that the right time would be during a kickoff meeting to learn all of that, but we are very interested to know what your needs are. We're shooting a bit in the dark and throwing everything at you right now until we have an idea of where you're at in the overall process. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate that.
Okay.
It's a great time to be having this funding and working on solutions that you've looked at problems for years. So it can be overwhelming, but this has been a good project and we like it this year.
Yeah, we've been moving quite slowly on purpose. So,
You're not alone.
okay.
You're not alone.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one's 2:30. I believe it's 2:45, but if that party is here, we could probably, I would just take a couple-minute recess.
Specific. We can't do that.
Oh. Yeah, we posted this at 2:45, so we can't adjust that time.
Yes. Motion to receive. Presentation.
Second.
Motion is second to receive report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. So I do have to entertain a motion to recess till 2:45.
So moved.
Motion second to recess till